Welcome to the Ringer WNBA show. I am super excited today to have Callie Fin, the Las Vegas Aces beat writer for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, on the show today. Callie, how's it going?
It's going well. You're the first person to say the name of my newspaper correctly on the first try. So
really,
major bonus. Normally it's like journal review journal. Not sure. Then they just like roll past. But you knocked it out.
See, I always get my name mispronounced, so I am like very painstaking with making sure that I get the introduction with people. I actually didn't even ask you how you wanted to be introduced. Are you good with that? Is there anything else you'd like to tack on?
No, you nailed it.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, we're off to a great start. That's awesome. Also, on the newspaper that you write for, I actually wanted to have you on before this. We scheduled this interview before you decided to just drop this huge exclusive interview with A'ja Wilson. So good on you for making our show a little bit better. But you had a great interview with her that has created some waves as well. Mm-hmm. So should we start with the championship locker room quote? Is that a good place to start?
I think we should. We should.
Okay. So I'll tee you up a little bit here. So A'ja, in this interview, is reflecting on the season that was, and actually says something that Becky Hammon said earlier in the season, where they got into training camp and they just did not have the feel of a championship locker room. A'ja says, out of the gate, going into training camp, I was like, we ain't got it. And it wasn't a talent issue. It was just something in the air. It just didn't have the feel of a winning team that her former coach, Dawn Staley, has said, hey, these teams, they look and sound and feel a certain way. She thought they would get there at some point in the season. They just didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so funny because I genuinely, there was so much in that story that we're talking about right now. And I figured people would latch on to stuff maybe about the trade or some other stuff that she had said. But like you mentioned, I didn't think that locker room quote would be that interesting to people because Becky Hammon said it. I mean, Becky Hammon said worse stuff. Like she mentioned she didn't like the vibes from day one. She didn't like their defensive effort from day one. That was a huge problem for the Aces all season. She had them doing elementary school, defensive slide drills to try and tighten that up because it just wasn't there. And multiple players, after that final game in the semifinals against the New York Liberty were we just didn't have it. You know what I mean? And so I just figured that was going to that was just us getting into her reflections of the past season. And she went on to say, she's spoken to Chelsea Gray, she's spoken to Jackie Young, and she's I told them my mindset. I want us to lead with a tighter fist or whatever you want to call it. We need to be way more locked in on this. We need to pay attention. If we hear something that just doesn't sound like a championship locker room, we need to tackle that. The phrase she used was, we're going to nip it in the bud. So I thought that was all really interesting. And I thought it just provided more context to what Becky Hammon had said all season. Because when she said it in the middle of the year at a random post-game press conference, we were just oh, that's not good. And then she went on to say that maybe the fame of being back-to-back champions was distracting some players. She said that. I've written that in stories before. So A'ja didn't say anything that hasn't been said before. To me, that was just normal Aces talk.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up that quote about nipping things in the bud, because I thought that was, to your point, really revelatory when we look back on the season that was, too, because it gives some context into why it was that it felt like every timeout, not every timeout, but it really felt like a lot of different timeouts, a lot of different post-game locker room press conference. It really did feel like it was just Becky Hammon trying to get this team back on track, right?
Yes.
And in that quote, she said, we're not going to let Becky come in and scream at us. We got to do it instantly. And I think, all great locker rooms do have a culture of self-accountability. So, it kind of makes me understand now why it felt like Becky was on tilt, basically, the entire season, because it seemed like she just wasn't able to get through to them. But that also gives some insight into their offseason as well, because it tells me that the way that they see themselves is a team that still has all of the talent in the world, despite, this somewhat huge shakeup, more a role player shakeup. Plus, obviously, Kelsey Plum going out for Jewel Lloyd, but this wasn't a team that I would say talent-wise has gotten a lot better, but now I kind of understand why. They do think that they are talented enough. It's just more that they kind of had an attitude problem.
Exactly. I mean, I think attitude problem one, and it's so interesting because I saw people reacting to this and like that one quote being like, you know, going into training camp, I was just like, we ain't got it. And people were like, what do you mean? She had, you know, multiple Olympians and the 6th player of the year. But to me, that's like more, like it supports that idea more. Like I think if it's an Olympic year and you've just won back-to-back WNBA titles, like you're focused on the Olympics and you're like, I'm about to win a gold medal in Paris. Like I can imagine that was a huge distraction. It was something that the team, like mainly Becky Hammon, brought up a lot throughout the season and like wrote about this as well. But she would be like, you know, nobody's ever won a championship like as a consecutive. It was like this very niche stat that she kept on like mentioning in post-game press conferences. Like nobody goes back to back in an Olympic year or something like that. And we're just like, okay, Becky, but like clearly like that was a distraction, even if it was just about like the physical aspect of it. Cause we know like there were lots of injury stuff going on. Like there was a minute where it seemed like Chelsea Ray was not going to play until the Olympics. And we like, that was just something that the media surrounding the Aces were like, is this really like the situation that we're looking at? Or is that like the focus of her rehab? And of course, like she came back before, but still was not at full strength and wasn't like healed even at the postseason. Like she was talking about new things being added to her shoe inserts and stuff like that. Jackie Young, it looked like Jackie got hurt at the Olympics and came back, and that second half of the season was like really rocky for her. So I just think that like, yes, having a stacked team would be great like any other year, but I think in the Olympic year, not to like make excuses for them, but just to like shed some light, I don't think that was ideal, you know?
Yeah. No, the making excuses point is really interesting because I do feel like, you know, what you're saying seems like what the franchise seems to think about themselves. But if anything, to me, that translates to Asia specifically, and maybe a little bit Becky. I almost feel like, you know, so this season, kind of hearing some of the things that Becky said, it almost feels like she had so much doubt about the team that she was putting out there in the press conferences, which I don't necessarily love. I'm not going to lie. But with Asia, it just feels like this is actually taking responsibility. It's saying, hey, we had all the pieces and we straight up did not execute. Now, I happen to not agree with that. I actually think that, you know, there are some tactical reasons that they lost, which we can get into. But I'm also kind of curious what you think about the leadership side of all of this, because it's going to obviously require a lot from Asia, bringing in somebody like Jewel Lloyd, who I also love what she said about Jewel in the interview, about how I think it was essentially, you know, when she feels good, she is really good. And we know that Jewel was in a situation where she didn't feel good, but it does feel like maybe that's a responsibility that Asia is putting on her plate to kind of keep not only Jewel, but everybody positive. And you also have Alicia Clark and Kelsey Plum, who are two big voices in the locker room that are outgoing. So it feels like this is going to be a big leadership season from Asia as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, man, that like cannot be overstated because it's not just Kelsey Plum and Alicia Clark. Like Sydney Colson, I think a lot of people think that she's just like all jokes and like, and like, I don't know, jokes and like crazy layup attempts and behind the back passes or whatever in the finals. But like, she's such a leader. And I've seen like, obviously being the beat reporter, it's like you go to a lot of practices, you go to a lot of games, and like, she can lock in a way that's like actually scary. Like she can go from like joking, laughing, and then all of a sudden her face is like deadpan and she's like, no, I'm serious. And it's like, oh wait, she's serious. We need to like listen and lock in. And so I think, you know, I heard Asia once say that like Sydney Colson taught her how to be a leader. And I just am like floored that she's got, and like I'm just shocked is the word maybe I should use, that Sydney Colson is going to be on a different team. So I feel like she was a huge part of like the heart and soul of this team. Same thing with Alicia Clark and Kelsey Plum. Like, you know,
didn't you write it? You wrote a story, or maybe it was on a podcast talking about this with Sid, right? Like where you were talking about how everybody thinks that she's just funny, but there's so much behind like the personality there.
Yeah, I've said this. I mean, I've said it a million times because I feel like people don't get it still. Like when I saw people reacting to like Sid being traded to the Fever, they're like, well, at least the content's going to be good. And I'm like, you guys don't get it. Like, yes, the content
The
probably will be
content will be good.
good
Yeah.
because she's like, she is hilarious. And she's a hilarious person to interview, but she can also be so reflective. And like,
Mhm.
I mean, so much of like the insight I was able to get throughout the season, because obviously now we're getting stuff from Asia and whatever. And I'm sure there will be more like as the
Mhm.
off season continues and as we prepare for this next season. But like, during the season, Sydney was like the main person that would tell me what was going on, you know, like because
Mm.
she has such a finger on the pulse of the locker room and like what needed to be done. So I think, yeah, without her, you're right. I think a lot of the pressure of leadership falls on
Mhm.
Asia, and I don't think that's
Yeah.
anything new for her. But I do think
Yeah.
it's like going to be a different load than maybe she's used to. And
Yeah.
I do think like even last season, like Candace Parker being injured, like that sucked, and
Mhm.
like that wasn't expected. But Candace Parker was a veteran, like champion, legend voice in the locker room, and they didn't have that this year. So like I think that
Mhm.
it's going to be an adjustment for Asia, but I'm sure, I mean, you have heard so many players like speak so positively about Asia as a leader and like an uplifter and a teammate. Like I'm sure she will handle it.
One more on Sid before we talk about Asia. When you were in the, I also love those insights as like just from a locker room perspective, from a reporter of like who's the player who you can actually talk to get insight. That's always like pretty interesting. But did she have the same sort of thoughts on what was going right and wrong as Becky and Asia, or was there a different perspective there from her?
Well, I think something that she mentioned kind of like at that mid-season point when it was like, okay, if the Aces are going to be good and like make a good postseason push, they need to tighten up right now. Like
Mm,
July time, she was kind of pointing out this is like I think they had just lost to this guy or like they had just like narrowly beat the Chicago Sky. I can't really remember the context, but like we sat down um in like the tunnels of a shoot around and she was basically just saying like we keep thinking that things are just going to fall into place for us. And I feel like that's almost
mm,
similar to what Asia Wilson said
yeah.
about how like, you know, I was thinking we were going to check off the box and then we just never did. Like we never checked all the boxes. But that's what she was saying. And she was like, you know, some games serve as like a wake up call for us. And like, that will work for us. And I think whatever game they had just come off of was a wake up call for them. So that's what she was saying. But like to her, it was all mental. That's like all she would say. Like she's like, we have the capability, we have the talent. We just are not like playing like the team that we know we
Mhm.
are.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it feels like. Do you think that late July August push where they were starting to play like the team that they wanted to be, where I believe they finished the season being the number one defensive team, right?
I don't know. I mean, all I remember is harping on how terrible the defense was at the
Right.
start of the season.
Right. No,
So
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, and it was, and it
yeah.
was, and it was. But do you think that them kind of figuring it out towards the end of the season? Do you think that kind of informed their off season to a degree?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that feature that we were referencing earlier with Asia, that conversation where she talks about like the tone of the locker room and things like that. That was based on I had like reminded her of something that she said in the final post game press conference of the season, where she had said like, you know, this sucks that our season ended the way it did, but like I think this has set the tone for us going into the off season. So then I asked her, and I'm like,
Mm,
hey, like, do you remember saying this? What do you feel like the tone was before, you know? And so like that's how we ended up reflecting on the tone of the year. But like, you know, going forward from that, I think it's clear like what's happened since then. Like we heard Becky Hammond say, okay, like I hate that this is not going to be the same group as it was this year because I love this group, but like we need to look in the mirror and figure out what we need to do to get better. And I think like some of those changes were not in their control, like losing two assistant coaches, but
mhm,
like getting rid of your GM seems like a pretty intentional choice. And then
mhm,
like some of these moves that they've made, like in free agency, like they lost all four of their unrestricted free agents. Kelsey Plum was an unrestricted free agent who they cored and traded. Sydney Colson, unrestricted free agent. Tiffany Hayes, Alicia Clark. Like they clearly like, and not that's not to say that like they didn't try to keep them, but like
mhm,
clearly their priorities like that doesn't appear to have been the priority. So I think that it seems like a lot of focus is on the front court, like improving
yeah.
that area. And it's interesting because that's an area where the front office seems to have like fallen short. Like they went after Brittany Griner, couldn't land her, like went after some other like top bigs and like could not land them. Ended up with Cheyenne Parker Tyus, who agreed to sign on like the veteran minimum. And I think that's really interesting. They also have Liz Kitley, who was kind of just on ice this past season, recovering. And Asia Wilson seems like super excited about her, so does Becky Hammon and the whole front office. So like those are players that would be really interesting, but then they have choices to make about Kia Stokes and Megan Gustafson. Like those salaries are not guaranteed. I don't know what those plans are, but like to me, it seems like that's part of their focus. It's like we need to improve. And I think the players that they've signed to replace the like veteran bench players that they lost are players that have something to prove. Dana Evans has something to prove. Like at the Chicago Sky, like that was clearly not a happy situation for her.
Yeah.
And she made it clear, like, I want to be out, you know? And so like now she's at the Aces, but you can't like make it clear that you want to be out of somewhere and complain that you're not being utilized the right way without really making something shake at the new destination. So it's like they have somebody, same thing with Tiffany Mitchell, like at the Connecticut Sun, she missed like half the season because she was battling life-threatening sepsis, which is obviously terrible and not an indictment on her skills or qualities as a player. But like people will look at that and be like, well, you didn't do anything. Like I saw people reacting to the Aces signing her and be like, wow, the Aces are really struggling. Like, no, now she has something to prove and be like, no, they're not struggling. They got better by signing me. And I think that that's like part of the tone that was set going into this offseason. Like we need people who have something to prove. We need help for Asia in the front court. We need to get it together.
Yeah. Okay. A couple things on everything that you said there. So on the note of Dana, one thing that I also liked about her exit interview, as much as she was complaining about the role that she didn't get to play, I honestly do think that she got a fair shot. And she just wasn't necessarily the answer for the Chicago Sky. And I think in Vegas, what she could potentially bring, it like just fits better in general as well. Like this is a team that isn't necessarily, as much as you obviously want to face, you want to be, getting the ball down to Asia as much as possible. They're not going to need the playmaking that the Chicago Sky were in need of. And I think Dana could definitely thrive, as it coming off of the bench. But I also like that she said something along the lines of, hey, I also learned that I need to be a better playmaker as well. I need to be a little bit more efficient. So there was some self-awareness that came with her frustration. So I'm kind of curious what she comes into the season looking like. But it also kind of harkens back to this Aces versus everybody narrative that the team really seemed to align behind. I felt like they couldn't really capture it this year. You can't really be Aces versus everybody coming off of a back-to-back championship. Like it's kind of tough. It felt like they were kind of trying to be like, yeah, because the tourism board stuff, and it's like, well, I don't know. Like you're like the underdogs who like make who are able to like pay everybody more. I don't know if that necessarily works. As much as I support it. I support any and all CBA violations that get the players more money. I'm here for it. I think the next CBA should have a stipulation that says, hey, if it's going to support the players, actually every other owner needs to step up. But it does seem like they're harkening back to that, right? Like even with Tiffany Mitchell, even with Jewel Lloyd, right? Like somebody who has a ton to prove.
I can't believe I left Jewel out. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, man, it's so interesting, that whole situation with the Seattle Storm. And to be honest, I think as the Aces reporter, I don't think I had a full grasp of like what was being alleged. And now looking back on Jewel's comments and like doing some questioning behind the scenes, like Jewel was the one that made those allegations. And that's not like coming from me. Like the ESPN has also reported that, which I think is like kind of just gone on under the radar. But like Jewel made allegations of bullying from the Storm's coaching staff. And then an investigation concluded without any findings. And she was like, I need to go. And like, I think that, I mean, this was a really interesting season for her because it's like, you saw the impact of whatever was going on in her play. Like I think she averaged like 19 points per game, which was still top 6 in the league, which is nothing to like sneeze at. But coming off of the season she had in 2023, when she was like the scoring champ for the year, that was a drop off. And I think now this is, like you said, an opportunity for her to come back and be like, you guys counted me out or you judged me off my one season. And hopefully she can prove some people wrong. Like that's kind of feels like the whole vibe the more we talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, look, like this is also somebody who, aside from her rookie year, last year was the lowest 3-point efficiency she has ever had. So, when it comes to the investigation, I don't know what happened. I also feel like the line between bullying and hard coaching is something that we don't always have like the best grasp of, and everybody's a little bit different in terms of how they take stuff. Now, look, I'm not saying Seattle was like, they could have been awful. I just don't know.
Right, we don't know.
Yeah, but the point is, she obviously didn't respond well to that. It just wasn't the style of coaching that was going to bring out the best in her. So now that she can go and be in this situation that potentially is going to be more encouraging, where they are saying, hey, like, go be yourself. I could just see the mental aspect of that just, being a huge boost for her, because I mean, everyone's different that way too, right? So, and then you add on top of that she probably is going to be like working her tail off this offseason to prove everybody wrong. So I think I'm pretty excited to see where the Aces are. I mean, I even feel like this a little bit about the front court too, where I had Steve Jones on last week and we were talking about the Aces, and I was pretty low on them. And I think the more that I think about it, if they can actually be, this is where I think I need to talk it out, because if they can actually go and be the team that they think they are, and they get a healthy Chelsea Gray, and they get a healthy Jackie Young, and they get, a year of I don't know if Asia Wilson can be more motivated than she perpetually is. But, Asia's had some time off, and she always comes back better. She always does. And I'm just kind of curious what she looks like. Maybe they're back? I don't know. I kind of feel like still tactically, I still just kind of feel like they're a little too slow for the Minnesota Lynx, and they're a little too small against the Liberty.
Yeah.
But that 4 position is, I think, going to be like the biggest hinge point in all of that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say, and this is something that I'm like trying to negotiate with all the time, is like, I don't think the Aces are done yet. Like in free agency, even though, I mean, I think at just a glance, it probably seems like, well, aren't we done? Like there's most of the major free agents are off the board. Like, I don't think that's the case for the Aces. I like anticipate at least one more move that should make like a decent splash. I know they have like one training camp contract signing that's coming up that's like not going to be significant for moving the needle with them. But I do think like there will be one more move that's going to be hopefully significant.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they have to? Like, I don't think they have enough players in the roster yet. There will be more moves coming.
Yeah, like I don't think you're right. I don't think they have enough players. So to me, again, like I don't think that, I'm not even really at the point of like trying to evaluate this group, because I'm like, I don't think that this is like, I don't know what we're looking at yet. Like, I don't think we're even close, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Do you have do you have a wish list?
A wish list? Ooh. I think as far as the front court, it's like, that is going to be what it's going to be. However, and this is like so unrealistic, it'll never happen, but I'm just like saying it here in case like the impossible happens. Yeah. I want Emma Miesemann in Las Vegas. Potentially, like, I mean, maybe like for selfish reasons, just so I can like cover her, because I just think she's such an exciting player to watch. I know she's like, there's like the odds of her coming to Las Vegas are so slim, because I know she makes so much money playing overseas, and I think like her family situation is like, she wants to be close to family and stuff like that. But I don't know if she's coming to the WNBA at all. I think a lot of people think that if she's going to come to the WNBA, it's going to be the Connecticut Sun, and like I don't think that. I don't. So I don't know. But that's like top. I mean, in terms of like a wish list, I think she would be like the top of that wish list for this team.
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be interesting, and I do think that. I mean, that could be, because I was going to ask you about this. So, they let's if we zoom back to the expansion draft. Kate Martin does not get protected, and I think everybody's presumption with that was, okay, they're bringing back all the vets, and then all of a sudden, Tiffany's gone, Alicia Clark is gone, and it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it was a money thing. It seems like, Seattle just came and was like, here, have the bag. The Valkyries weren't able to make a splash in free agency, and they were like, okay, we'll just pay Tiffany Hayes, and see what happens from there. Um, if you go back in time, I'm sure, the Aces would be like, damn, we probably should have protected Kate Martin. And that has implications for the 4 position that I think is really important. But maybe they didn't overpay at least one. Like, I would have, like, that's what I was thinking. Is like, okay, well, overpay one of them. At least if you're like, don't let both of them walk, especially since you kind of have some cap space. But maybe they could potentially be holding out for somebody like that.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, the Aces front office, I know for a fact, has like tried to recruit MMA Simmons. Like I said, I don't really think that's likely. But I like that doesn't mean that like it'll. I don't know. They've made a lot of big swings that I think like just kind of didn't pan out, and so I don't know like why that is. I think that that's maybe like a conversation for a different pod. But I think that with Tiffany Hayes,
just one more thing on Emma. And I'll say this because you're a professional. You mentioned her making a lot of money. This is a team that could offer her a lot of money on the books and potentially off the books. All right, let's go to
Okay,
let's get the tourism board involved again.
Yeah, let's get them. Well, let's look at them on the phone. I don't really know. I don't even know, and this is something that I'm following like closely, so nobody at the Ringer like scoop me. But like, I don't know if the LVCBA is even planning to do those sponsorships for this upcoming season. Like, that's a real question mark because the WNBA has hired an outside firm to conduct a full investigation and has been like very tight-lipped about the progress of that investigation. And I'm just like, how long can this investigation go? I think that's like maybe impacting the LVCBA's approach. I know initially they were like, we're just going to keep doing it until they say don't do it. But like, maybe that has changed. I don't know. But back to Tiffany Hayes, because you were asking about the expansion draft. I can say with like full certainty that the Aces were under the impression that Tiffany Hayes was coming back. That was re-signing with the team as an unrestricted free agent. And I think that Jewell Loyd trade, like, obviously everybody knew that Kelsey Plum wanted out, and because they cored her, they were going to have to like, you core somebody, like you got to trade them. Like, that's like what it is. And then you're going to get probably somebody of that same situation. Like, Jewell Loyd is on the Supermax salary. So like, that's what she'll be making with the Aces. And like, I think that changed the outlook for a lot of the free agents, because they were like, well, if Jewell Loyd's going to come to this team and make $249,000 or $294,000 or whatever it is, then like, why can't I go somewhere and make more money? So that's like genuinely, like, that's what happened. I don't know how else to say that, but like, that's
fair. Yeah, that happens. I mean, Tiffany Hayes seemed like she was under the impression that she was going to be back too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that that was like a last minute situation. Like, I think that you can like surmise stuff like that, even sometimes from just like the way things are reported. Like, a lot of times it's like if people had known in advance that Tiffany Hayes was going to the Valkyries, like, that news would have been out like days before that, it was announced. But like, no, the Valkyries announced one morning, like, we're signing Tiffany Hayes. And then ESPN, like 2 seconds before, was like, ESPN is signing Tiffany Hayes. Like, that's a good indicator that happened like at the last minute. So I think that, I think if they could go back in time, you definitely would protect Kate Martin, because it's like, now you've given away 2 really important players to this expansion team for essentially nothing. Like, you've gotten nothing in return. In fact, this is like put you at a disadvantage in your off season. So
now you're even
2020.
Now you're even older as well too, right? Which is not great for, and I think, that's just one of those challenges with team building in general when you are as good as the Aces are. But you had this player who kind of fit perfectly into what you were trying to do in the present and the future, and now she's gone, and that's not great.
No, it's not good at all. And like, I think in some ways it puts, like, you have to wonder how their front office is viewing that decision to like not have a general manager. Because I think from the outside looking in, like, I don't work for the Aces, like, I don't know what's going on in their front office, but like, that just seems like a choice that, like, in light of some of these moves, doesn't it just makes you wonder, like, would you have been able to navigate that better if you had a GM? I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, maybe this is doing a little bit too much hindsight is 2020, but considering that a GM's job is to have the ultimate foresight, maybe they could have predicted some of the things that we're talking about now, or potentially just thought, hey, well, look, we're probably going to have to core and trade Kelsey Plum, whether or not we keep Kate Martin. Wouldn't it be great to have her as a potential trade asset to go along with Kelsey Plum? Now, obviously, it wasn't necessary. Still got a great return back, but I think that maybe that would be one of the things that you consider as well. But it is kind of hard to Monday morning quarterback this, especially as I think the Kate Martin decision, I think in real time it was also pretty bad. But the Tiffany Hayes part of it, you can't always predict stuff like that happening, especially when she herself is like, hey, if I'm coming back, I'm one of the aces, right? Like, it's like, that's I don't necessarily, I didn't love the aces off season, but I don't think the Tiffany Hayes point is one where you necessarily want to split too many hairs. Like, sometimes things just happen. I did want to ask you about the new assistant coaches, though. I feel like it's been a kind of under the radar part of their offseason. They've hired 3 new assistant coaches, Ty Ellis, John Lucas III, and Larry Lewis, all former assistants, player development people with a lot of. One thing that stood out to me was the NBA experience with all of these guys too. I'm curious if you think do you think Becky, now that a lot more of these NBA coaches are actually really interested in WNBA jobs, do you think that allows her to flex her coaching connections a little bit more? And also, I mean, I imagine it'll probably be a bit of adjustment for, especially from a player development perspective, coaching in the W for some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the first part of your question, I think that Becky Hammon has shown, since she got the job with the Aces a few years ago, she has a formula that works, Natalie Nakaze, Tyler Marsh were part of that same formula where it's okay, these are people that have worked in player development in the NBA and also held coaching roles in the G League. And so now we're going to bring them into the WNBA and give them a shot. And now they're both head coaches in the WNBA. So I think that's a winning play. It works for her. And I think that in terms of flexing her muscle, I really don't think that the WNBA is at a point where it's hard to pull people into it. This league is an exciting league. It's a growing league. And I think that she also didn't pick coaches that have no connection to the W. I really liked John Lucas III as a hire because his ties to the W are so deep. He's from Houston. He was a practice player with the Comets when he was in high school. And then obviously with all of his NBA experience, in addition to that work that he was doing, also would host coaching camps and work with players your Paige Beckers, your Angel Reese. He knows, he's very familiar with these players and has worked with them. So working with WNBA players is not going to be some huge stretch for him. It's it's not his only tie to women's sports is being a girl dad, which I hated. Yeah, it happens. Yeah. He does happen to be also a girl dad, but like I said, not the only tie.
I'll put that on the top of his resume.
Exactly. That's you know what? In the marketing materials, the Aces should have led with he's a girl dad. Yeah. I think that would have been really smart to do. But yeah, no, I think that I really like him as a hire. And then same thing with Ty Ellis, and I mean the whole group. And the cool thing too is that they know each other because of their shared time in the NBA. These are people that were coaching the NBA at the same time as Becky, so they already knew of Becky. Were close with her associates and knew of each other. So then when it came to making the leap here, it's not anything new for them. And I think every single one of them mentioned that Becky speaks the same language that they do. And I think that goes a long way because I remember Candace Parker saying in an interview or something like that, playing for the Aces was she had to learn a completely new language because so many of the staff had come from the NBA and talk about the game a little bit differently and approach the game differently. And these staff members are going to be up on the lingo. they're viewing the game the same way that Becky is. And so like that's going to be really helpful for the players. Like Tyler Marsh was really good with that in the terms of like he would stay after practice with like every single like the new additions to the team early in the off season would be at practice for like hours afterwards, like reviewing practice stuff and being like, okay, when Becky says this, it means this and la la. So they're going to be able to pick up right where he left off in that aspect.
That's pretty cool. That's an interesting aspect of like kind of what the Aces have brought to the W as well. Like kind of being that team that made everybody else catch up and modernizing the game. And, you know, I think one thing that Becky said too is like, hey, it looks like everybody else has caught up to where we're at and we kind of need to level up. And that to me is the biggest question going into this season is like, are they going to be able to actually pull that off internally? Then I think it's a question. I think it's a real question. I think a week ago I was kind of low on it. I'm curious to see what they do with the rest of the offseason.